You're listening to NIL Now, a podcast dedicated to the name, image, and likeness of today's college and high school athletes.
So we're going to explore the crazy and wildly interesting world of name, image, and likeness.
NIL Now, covering the latest sports business headlines and keeping you informed on the nation's top performers. This is NIL Now, where the stars of tomorrow are getting noticed today.
It's the Wild Wild West, but we're wrangling it in.
Presented by Headline Studio and Reddit. Here are your hosts, Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
We are back. New year, new episode of NIL Now, a production of Headline Studio and Reddit, where we cover the crazy and wildly interesting world of name, image, and likeness. We hope you all enjoyed happy and healthy holidays. We're excited to break down some of the big NIL headlines, especially coming to you from the early National Signing Day period and bowl season. Later, we're going to hear from AL.com Alabama beat writer Michael Casagrande, one of my colleagues, former colleagues at AL.com. So stick around for that. And then Kevin, he's here to lay some truth on us, because that's what he does best.
That's right.
NIL headlines.
Let's jump on into this bad boy. Lincoln Riley gave some thoughts, some insight on the early recruiting cycle, the NIL, I guess, in the recruiting cycle. And so during early National Signing Day, which is obviously even different at this point in time than even just a few years ago, so you've added this other layer to things. He said during the early National Signing Day period press conference, he touched on the role NIL plays in recruiting high school players. He acknowledged the platform and position USC athletes are in to make money through NIL, but added that he wants opportunities for his entire locker room, not just the superstars. Here's a listen to what he said.
NIL plays a big role. I mean, it's and the thing that you've seen, out now is every school and everybody has kind of their own spin on it, right? Everybody's got their own strategy on it, and I know a lot of people have talked about, well, the rules are gray, or the NCAA's, they're enforcing this or not enforcing that. I mean, to me, the rules are pretty clear. I mean, you can't engage with high school players about it. Players can't enter into deals, before they get on campus. You can't have a collective meet with them. I mean, it's pretty simple. There's certainly a lot of people that are, kind of finding their own way to do things, and that's always been the case in college football, though. I mean, it's just probably a little bit more. There's a little more light on it now than maybe ever before, which maybe as time goes on will be a good thing. We'll see how it all plays out. So, and I think with that, just like we've become more comfortable with the university that we're in and learning about the types of players that will do best here, I think we as a staff have been able to work with our administration and our people to be in a really good place from an NIL perspective, and I think we're very, very confident and secure in the opportunities that our guys are getting. But the reality is, this day and age, listen, you gotta make decisions and on how you're going to handle this, because it is so new and right. There's no manual. I think what we're seeing a lot across the country is, I think you see a lot of people maybe not quite paying attention to the locker room and getting fixated on one recruit here, one recruit there, and that's. There's some obvious big risk with that, because at the end of the day, this game is still a team game, and the best teams win this game. And so we're going to continue to have a team first focus on it and continue to try to put our guys in position where they can all do very, very well on the field, off the field, NIL, all those things. And again, that's one of the great things about this place, is we have some built-in advantages that nowhere else has.
All right, so Kevin, listening to him talk about this takes me back to a specific conversation I remember also having with Florida head football coach Billy Napier. Kind of his comments were specific to, oh, by the way, we have guys that come on our team. We have players that are signed onto our team. They're already making money before they've even earned the nameplate on their jerseys, before they've even earned playing time, earned the opportunity to be out there competing. And so I get what he's saying. And I think this is a question that honestly probably came up, in my opinion, very early, and a question that I had when this whole NIL thing was just sort of in its baby phases. The discussions were happening. We knew it was coming. What is this going to mean for the landscape of college athletics? And so my big question was, does NIL present a distraction And more importantly, how does this affect all the players on the team, especially when you're talking about athletes that, maybe 85 players on a team, you might have one or two, but then take a gymnastics team. You've got 12 gymnasts on scholarship and maybe one of them is making big time NIL money. What does that do to the morale of the rest of the team? I want to know from your standpoint as someone that obviously being at the top of your game back at Virginia Tech, let's just say someone's gonna float you, let's say $50,000, $100,000. I mean, you're worth way more than that, of course. But as the star running back of the team, how does that play in? Like if you're the running back of the team and you're making X amount and guys around you are not, does that affect the guys around you? And does that affect also your way of thinking?
I think that it can. I think that it will. So, yeah, my quarterback in college was Marcus Vick, my second year, him and Brian Randall. And I remember Marcus pulling up one day with an Escalade and some jewelry. And I think, it caused a little bit of, distraction amongst the teammates just because they couldn't get that or they couldn't have it. So I think in some cases, as you can hear out here, I think at Tennessee, they were talking about some issues there and a fight broke out because of NIL deals, people just not feeling valued. So I do think that can happen, but I think it's up to the coaches and to the staff to figure out how they'll be able to get some of those team deals where everyone feels like there's an equitable culture of compensation. That's what we like to call it over here. I think that it's definitely something that should be the coaches, staff, and people should be alarmed about. But it's also real life too. When you get into the NFL, you play on the next level. The quarterback is making a certain amount of money, the receivers, and you just never know. It's all about how a team values you and how they see you in an overall bigger picture. So I think it's something that is allowing players to experience that at an earlier age, but it's also something that you have to manage and keep your eye on.
Well, and I think maturity definitely falls into that in a big way. And obviously maturity is still very much growing and developing. And kind of what you said about the NFL, I remember my trainer, Lewis Sanders, he played in the league for, I think, almost 9 years. And I remember him talking specifically about how guys would literally get their weekly paychecks and how different they were, right? Like you'd have a paycheck that'd be, you say a weekly paycheck worth $2,500, and then dude over here have a paycheck that's worth $100,000, and that's in like 1 week, right? And the way that was kind of disseminated and deciphered, I guess it would be easy to look at that because to me, a weekly paycheck of $2,500, I'd be like, boom, yeah, heck yeah. But then when you see the dude next to you, $100,000, it's like, whoa, like way out of my range, totally different league. And so, I feel like there would be some comparisons. The other thing I want to bring up, Kevin, in this case, this just comes to mind as someone, obviously on the gymnastic side of things, the money isn't necessarily there. Although in a previous episode, we talked specifically about one of the highest paid athletes being Olivia Dunn from LSU. Also another one, Suni Lee, who was an Olympic gymnast, Olympic gold medalist just in this past Olympics, who really made headlines, just for her performance. And then obviously having gone through what she did with her national teammate, her USA teammate, Simone Biles. One thing that caught my eye specifically and really kind of resonated with me is that Suni Lee was quoted saying that she felt like she had imposter syndrome. And what she meant by that was that, a lot of people felt like that gold medal was handed to her because of the fact that Simone Biles was having obviously some mental blocks and had to essentially resign and take herself out of the running. In all fairness, it's kind of like if she would have been injured or whatever it is, that she felt like she didn't, win that gold medal fair and square, I guess is kind of what she was getting at. So I share all that to say, do you think there's a level of also imposter syndrome that if you're one of the top athletes performing and then let's say you do get injured or you are no longer the starting quarterback or the starting running back and you're now fourth on the depth chart and you've been cashing all these paychecks but you aren't living up to the hype and standard, there's got to be a lot of pressure under that. And it's got to just add another layer of maybe anxiety for a lot of athletes that feel like maybe they're not performing up to the level that their expectations were, not only from a fan standpoint, a coach's standpoint, but now from a monetary standpoint.
I think that's a good point. Hadn't thought of it from that perspective, but yeah, you would have to. I mean, could you imagine being the starting quarterback, getting some NIL deals, and the next thing you know, you're not the starter. You've locked in that contract and you're still, being paid. But again, like I said, that's life. For two, look at Russell Wilson at the Denver Broncos right now. He got the highest. I think he's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and not really having much success over there. And teammates speaking out about his play, and coaches and fans. It's just, for him, can you imagine the pressure? But at the same time, you got to come in and try to do what you are being paid to do and do your job. College is obviously a little bit of a different perspective, but at the same time, the results, you got to go out there and handle business. I mean, now that I would say that the athletes are being compensated or taking part of the business side of their name, image, and likeness in college sports. You almost got to treat yourself as a business and go out there and handle business no matter what the pressure is. You're already at this level of playing big time college sports, then the pressure is already great. I do think this adds to it, but I think they're already primed for pressure.
Yeah. And before we jump into our next segment, I do want to say, from a personal experience and standpoint, I was on scholarship at Rutgers. We didn't have full scholarships, mostly because we were a tier 2 sport. So even though Division I, technically most gymnastics teams offer 12 full scholarships, and at Rutgers, the funding was not there. So it ended up being, I think, 4.6 scholarships. And so that could be divided however the coaching staff wanted to. Now, granted, I was very fortunate that I was given maybe a higher dollar amount than some of the other scholarship athletes on the team. But that was hard for me when I was having to sit on the sidelines, when I was going through, tragic events in my life early in my career. And then after that, it was injury after injury after injury. And I was locked into that scholarship. And so, for me, I would say that I did have some of that sort of maybe similar feelings that I mentioned with Suni Lee of just like, man, like, these expectations are so high, and I'm watching this walk-on compete in my place because I'm injured. I can't compete. I can't do it. I can't rise to the occasion because of whatever circumstances, or maybe they're just better than me. Right. And that was always hard for me because it definitely sent me into a lot of what ifs, a lot of, internal battles, emotionally. I think that's something that I think while these athletes are tough and these athletes are obviously gritty and determined and have, a certain level of work ethic and ability, I also think it can wear on them. And so I do think that would kind of dovetail into that question I sort of asked earlier about the distraction in the locker room. And you mentioned it's up to the coaching staff to kind of figure that out. And how do you create that in the locker room? And I guess that's probably a question that some of these coaches are trying to figure out. And I'd be curious to know at this point, have they figured it out? And what does that look like? And Kevin, if you were a coach right now, what do you think your approach would be in resolving maybe some of those distractions that might come with some of the players at the higher level or the players at the more star positions gaining more notoriety and getting more money for that?
Definitely a topic that needs to be tackled, especially from the mental health standpoint. If you think about, the coach at Ohio State was talking about mental health and his personal mental health, but I think mental health is obviously, there's more of a spotlight on it these days. So it's probably something that needs to be in conversation with someone equipped to have that conversation in team meetings, or, when you can get a group of the players all together and kind of talk about this. And I think, I've heard different coaches and seen different, interviews where coaches are in front of the team and they're talking about like NIL from a standpoint of, oh, it's going to come. We want you guys to be able to get compensated, but it has to come, secondary to football and your education. It's that third piece. It's not the main piece. So I think when you're recruiting kids and their families, you have to be careful and kind of discern where they stand, because you'll know who will be somewhat of an issue for you in the future. So when you're talking to these parents and their kids and you're having conversations about NIL, and they don't bring that up first, but they bring that up as a part of the equation, then that's probably the type of kid that you want in your locker room.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think that's just building the culture. And to your point, that's what the coach is obviously there for. What kind of culture can you build? And then it also comes down on the players. I think a lot of these teams have leadership committees where certain players within certain position groups are brought together to kind of formulate some of these leadership ideals. And so I think it just kind of, obviously it resonates and it trickles down from the coaching staff. And so I think that this just adds another layer of how do you build the right culture and what does that look like? And again, it's you don't know what you don't know. So I think a lot of it is a learning experience for these coaches, and will be interesting to see how it continues and where coaches have found really that mindset and maybe that ability to tap into keeping that positive culture despite some of these challenges with NIL and what people are facing right now. All right. And so kind of looking now at our second headline, which is interesting because this is sort of on the flip side of maybe what we've seen with the transfer portal. And of course, some of these NIL deals maybe snagging players, enticing them to go to another school. So despite these transfer inquiries and NIL money elsewhere, star receiver Quentin Johnston stayed put at TCU this season. So this was an article that came out from ESPN's Chris Lowe reporting that Quentin Johnston stayed with the Horned Frogs despite inquiries to transfer elsewhere during the offseason. Johnson, a two-time All-Big 12 wide receiver, caught over 1,000 yards this season. He had 163 yards and a touchdown on 6 passes in the Fiesta Bowl against Michigan, and of course is going to get to play now for a national championship. So this worked out really well in his favor. He is signed on with Think NIL, which of course we had Brent Cunningham, who is founder of that company, Think NIL, and somebody that's been big with them on TCU. So of course, go back and check out that episode. He gave some great insight. But according to On3, his annual NIL valuation sits nearly at $300,000. So with that being said, we're kind of on the flip side of this. This worked out well for him. He decided to stay. He was not enticed to leave TCU. Do you think in this case, this is something that maybe players' NIL value should help him, the fact that he decided to stay? I mean, how does this benefit him? Obviously now, I think the real benefit comes from the fact that he's a national championship contender. What are your thoughts on kind of this story, this headline, and him deciding to stay put?
I think it's a big deal, Does it help his NIL value? I think it does now, because it was a success story. If this is even like a smaller school, and he has the opportunity to go to a larger school, then I'm not sure it, helps his value if he stays. I think it all depends on the team, the situation, and the market. So you kind of got to always be thinking about those three things. But for him, definitely, this is going to be huge for his personal growth. I also think his NIL value goes up with that team, especially now that they're going to be in the national championship. A lot of people are going to be watching. A lot of people are going to be talking about the story that he stated. He came back. So I think people within the organization, the team, the fans, they're all going to be, and the alumni, they're going to be happy and wanting to do big things for him.
Yeah, one thing that he was quoted saying in this article that really kind of jumps off to me, he said, I feel like overall that people are going to see dollar signs, and obviously it's not something to be taken lightly. You see X amount of dollars and say, why wouldn't I go there? But if you're offering that to 3 5-star players on the team playing the same position, someone's not going to get to play. So you're going to have the money, but if you came to play football, which is why I try my best to try not to get caught up into it. So I think that kind of shows the level of maturity for him in recognizing like, okay, let's just say TCU, like I said, his NIL valuation's at $300,000. Let's just say that, somewhere else was going to get him upwards of $500,000. Okay, wow, that's a $200,000 price difference. That's a pretty big deal. But also, I think you have to point to perhaps the maturity of him, the player, and also what he's been taught and maybe some of the values that he's created for himself, and recognize, hey, if I go to these other places, I might not have the same opportunity. He also knows what he's up against. I think in that team, in that locker room, he knows where he's at. And let's be real, KJ, like just picking up and going to another team is not easy. You don't walk in that locker room and immediately earn respect. You don't walk in that locker room and immediately have your brothers for life. That takes time. So there is a risk, even though there's dollar signs involved, there's still a massive risk to just packing your bags and going somewhere else that says, hey, we'll pay you more. And I think you really have to weigh it out. And just like if you're going to enter into the NFL draft early, I think there's a lot that goes into these decisions. And I think if you have the right coaching staff and the right support staff and the right people around you, including your support system at home, family members, friends, whatever it may be, the hope is that they're steering you in the right direction and helping you think through all of the variables, not just the dollar sign.
Yeah, you definitely have to weigh those different variables. You got to know who your head coach is, who's the offensive defensive coordinator, who's your position coach, how many players do you have in at the same position? What was their production last year? How am I going to fit in? Does the offense work for me? Am I going to get targets? Like all these different factors, those are the things that really you're going to have to make a decision about. It's not just the money. The money is just a part of it.
NIL headlines.
All right, now we're going to jump into our second segment. Bobak Hairy joins us from the college football Reddit team. And always giving us the entertainment headlines from the threads, everything there is to know. As we dive into the new year, obviously lots of things have transpired, lots of talk. Football season is officially winding down. Basketball season's winding up. And of course, all of our other college athletics as well that are in the winter and spring. So a lot of fans want to have their input on what could improve the NIL and or transfer situation, because obviously that's been a big topic. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks. Obviously, a lot of opinions. Scanning through the threads, Bobak, what are some things that you've seen that maybe jump off to you that, good, bad, or ugly, fans have put out there for you that could potentially improve and or change the landscape and the scope of what NIL looks like at the current present moment, as well as the transfer portal?
After someone posted the question, if you could change one rule that would improve the NIL or transfer situation, what would it be? It was posted by a Utah user, Utah by 5. And what he thought was, in his own initial post, was proposing that would be bringing back the idea of sitting out a year to transfer if you've taken NIL money at a school. And I mean, sometimes it's self-selective. I think the people that got gravitated toward this kind of discussion were thinking things have gotten a little too wild as far as being a free agency of sorts. The top comment by an Ohio State fan, CC20R, was like, you get one transfer without sitting out. Then if you transfer again, you have to sit out a year, barring situations like moving home because of a sick relative. And, the idea of punishing coaches. That idea seemed to recur again and again. But there was, of course, a pushback, which personally I agree with, which is, why do we want to restrict the players this much? I mean, the whole point of all of this was to give players more freedom to do things, to make choices for themselves. There is a bit of a pushback on that sense where, we wanted, a lot of the people that wanted to have these opportunities for students to get paid are suddenly upset that, oh, wait, now they have the ability to have freedom. Well, that's too much freedom. That's too much choice of themselves. So there's both sides of that kind of going on in the conversation. Although I think some fans see, for example, Barton's, any coach found tampering should get a suspension without pay. Well, we'll see how that one would ever work out, right? But I think some of the other ideas were just putting all of the NIL offers on the table. And that one, I think, maybe has some merit to it. The one person suggested, like, if you're giving out 70 of these offers, you got to have them all listed in a database. That way the players can see what you're actually putting out there and whether or not your team could ever fulfill that. But that was basically the gist of it. A lot of folks were kind of all over the place because, I mean, some folks were like, this is the inevitable reality of where we were headed. And some of the restrictions that seem to penalize players seem to be a bit, I don't know, overreaction. But of course, we know this was NIL was never going to be popular with everyone.
Kevin, I want to ask you, when you talk about being able to be transparent and put all those things out there, because I think you could weigh in on this. Is it feasible and possible to really put out there everything that's available and kind of have a database and or public records opportunity for people to go in there and kind of see what's being divvied out? Like, is that fair? Is that possible? Is that feasible? Is that sustainable in your opinion?
I don't know. This is a fair question. I think it's definitely a topic that needs to be looked into a little bit more. I think that, when you're talking to, athletes and their families and thinking about deals and offers that might be on the table, you don't know if someone's making something up, for one. For two, I do think it's valid if a kid is, has offers but don't really know how to track those offers and have the details line by line on what school is offering what. I think it could help from that position as well. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a black box right now, where there might be a collective talking to a kid about what the offer could be, but then you never know what their other offers are either. Well,
and I'll say this, I know Auburn specifically, just kind of having dealt with them a good bit, they do have essentially when an athlete does an NIL deal, they've got to log it. And so essentially they have to log what it is and give details about what it is. And so I'm not sure who exactly is monitoring that, if it's something that policed at all. And really, I don't know if policing is the right word for that, but what goes into that and really who is available to see that sort of, I guess, Rolodex of opportunities.
Even with that, that's kind of funny. So you have influencers who are at a number of these universities where the universities have said to the kids, you have to report your deals. So the deal goes in there and then compliance looks at it to make sure that the contract and everything is on the up and up. And if they see any red flags, they may say something to the athlete. But here in this situation, when you have somebody transferring from one school to the other, the university that you're at, they don't want to see that offer from another school, like, you know, trying to get you to go somewhere. So I think it's just funny. Like, it's really a weird situation.
You know, a database could end up in like a bidding war.
Exactly. Well, that's what it would be. That's what it is now. Like, it's a bidding war that you can't see what the pieces are, really. You're kind of guessing.
That would be more entertaining for the public, though.
Oh.
You know, folks would be all trying
Absolutely.
to see the public database.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of like back when eBay was more of a bidding website versus just now you can buy it now at whatever price, like the back and forth. Now, I will say, Bobak, before we get to our next headline, I did like what Mr. Bovine Joni said. I don't know if you saw this comment. He said the NCAA could adopt rules similar to soccer clubs. Players sign contracts with teams, but players can transfer to other teams with the other team paying a transfer fee that the two clubs agree to. So in other words, a player like Caleb Williams would demand a much higher fee, maybe in the millions, while 3-star players that haven't seen the field, want to be closer to home, maybe have a near zero fee. This would also reward a group of 5 teams who found a diamond in the rough and their player wants to transfer to a Power 5, as the G5 team would then make some money out of it while the player gets into a better situation himself. So obviously, this kind of goes in line with sort of that penalty, right? The penalty that you used to face with the transfer portal, like the 1 year you got to sit out, especially you couldn't transfer within the conference. And so in this way, there is a penalty, some sort of something that a school faces. I just wonder what that fee would be and if it's enough for a school to even flinch and make it even damaging and or not worth their while to even go after a player because of, you know, that particular fee and what that would look like.
I think that's a great point. The other argument I was hearing that at least at some sport was, you know, outside of, you know, the one way you could solve this is by just having employment relationships with your athletes. And then you could put some limitations on them. But without employment contracts and the demands of the NCAA and schools that athletes aren't employees, they can't do some of these things. They simply can't. It's going to be fascinating to see how this continues to develop and what sort of rules or attempts to change things get implemented, if any.
Yeah, I see the NCAA trying to put some restrictions. But right now, I think the space is still good. I think I like that there's a lot of movement happening. You know, sometimes as a former Virginia Tech person, you know, we had one of our top receivers go to Notre Dame. So, you know, been on both sides of seeing this. And then we had another top receiver come to us, or a quarterback from Baylor. So I kind of like the way that it's going, but at the same time, I don't feel like the NCAA is going to let it continue to be as free as it is. I think they're going to try to figure out some restrictions. But the whole sit out a year, I think is bogus. I don't think that makes sense.
All right, and Kevin, this kind of goes along with this second headline. Pat Narduzzi accusing Utah of flipping Pitt commit Dadrian Zipper with NIL promises. Here's a clip of what he said coming out of the early signing period in December.
Okay, that's the other interesting thing about this name, image, and likeness is I don't know if they're signing, you know, contracts saying don't say a word, but it is like hush hush. Okay, now you hear rumors and high school coaches will tell you stuff, but a lot of it is hush hush and you don't hear. I know we lost one. Should I just say it? I guess we lost one to Utah that, you know, was a good receiver for us, and you know, I think that had something to do with it. So.
And then, you know, Narduzzi added that he fears coaches and programs are lying about the benefits they'll be able to provide to an athlete during the recruiting process. And because there are no shared records of who is giving what to who and when, there's no way to verify the wild rumors that fly around the sport. So with that being said, I think we're on both sides of this fence because before money was allowed to be exchanged, there was no record of all this, right? You know, people could get away with what they got away with. And now we're on the other side of it, kind of shaking our head saying, now we don't have records of what money is being given that is actually legal. So I don't know, y'all.
This is when they talk about what the wild, wild west of NIL is in the industry. I think this is probably one of the biggest things from that standpoint of, like you said, of transparency, not really knowing what the athletes are getting or knowing the deals that are out there. And you have to take the word of whoever is, it could be a handler, you know, a family member. And it kind of just sets the stage for, bad business practices, because you don't know who's doing what or who's saying what. So I do think that that's a big point. I think that Coach Narduzzi needs to just focus on the NIL space, like have somebody from their collective be, aggressive in the space. It's not going anywhere. We can repeat after me. NIL is here to stay. I'm tired of hearing, like I said before, where there's athletic directors or a coach complain about what's happening in the space as it pertains to NIL being a factor. It is a factor. It's not going anywhere. But I do think that there could be some pieces put together or put in place that, bring some transparency to the space. I think that's one of the main pieces that's making this continue to be the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, and as they were talking about it on RCFB over on Reddit, they remember that Narduzzi had earlier complained that Lincoln Riley had used promising, lucrative NIL deals to convince, their superstar receiver Jordan Addison to come over and become a Trojan. And he also said, which was really strange, just a few weeks earlier, he had already kind of said that there was tampering going on with UNC quarterback Drake May being promised $5 million to transfer from Carolina. And that didn't even involve his team. Actually, the top comment by Revitz was, "This dude cries a lot," which is unfortunate because it's become kind of a trend. And I kind of get it, because Narduzzi, every time somebody's complaining about this, it's usually Narduzzi, and he's usually saying something. And to the point where I think a lot of the fans are like, well, you are in a P5 conference, dude. I mean, you should be able to at least compete somewhat, especially, this is a 3-star recruit, and that's not to denigrate him at all, but it seems kind of odd that this is what the fight is over it. And one of the Utah fans, Hunt from the Front, noticed that he's actually one of their lowest rated recruits in the class, and they're not sure they would have necessarily, quote, opened the Brinks truck for him specifically. And, it's really funny when you see fans from rival schools, even a Utah State fan was like, why is Pitt here freaking out about a famously under-talented and overachieving Utah football team is supposedly buying all the top end talent? This seems really funny. I mean, one of the other Utah fans was like, I never would have in my wildest dreams guessed we would have been accused for something like this, which to the support of many an Alabama fan who thought they would be the ones accused of that. Another one, an Oklahoma fan, Chief Big, welcome to 2022, Pat. And I guess 2023 at this point, right? And then another user, Tarmac, who's a USC fan, which goes to an old joke among our fan base, but he quotes Narduzzi, "I would like to speak to the NCAA's manager, Karen Narduzzi." So it's a bit of a dog pile over this one.
Yeah, all complaints is, we're not going to use the word complaint anymore or crying. We're just going to call it doozy. We're just going to change the word.
Don't be a doozy, right? Instead of don't be a Karen, don't be a doozy.
Exactly. Just focus, get your NIL program together. You know what I'm saying? And they have one. So that's the other thing of this. It's it's not like they're not offering kids to, come to Pitt through NIL. Like every school is doing that. The
door swings both ways, man. One person actually suggested that there should be an RCFB Hater of the Year, and the name of the award should be the Narduzzi Hater of the Year award.
That would be good. Yeah, I don't want to beat the dead horse on Coach Narduzzi. I don't know him personally, but some of this is just coming off a little bit of a whiny, and I know they have a good NIL program, so they just need to focus on that and getting those kids to Pitt. Don't worry about everybody else.
You're listening to NIL Now.
Let's welcome in now our guest, Michael Casagrande, Alabama beat reporter for AL.com. Appreciate you joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at @bycasagrande. Of course, he's got all the news and notes and everything there is to know about Alabama football. He's been trailing them for, what'd you say, Michael, over a decade, 12, 13
years?
Let's just
go with over a decade, yeah. 2009, started in 2009, 1 year off covering the Hurricanes, Miami in 12. So whatever that math is, I try not to think about the numbers too much. Long enough.
Long enough, right? Well, you've been with them a long time. Obviously, I know when I stepped foot in the state of Alabama in 2011, you welcomed me with open arms. So I much appreciate that, when I was a young budding journalist over there at the local CBS affiliate.
I don't think you're that much younger. We're about the same age, so it's not like I'm some old timer.
That is true. Yeah, I guess just first and foremost, I'd love to know from you, obviously now that NIL is essentially from a football standpoint, we'll say, has been in the mix for now 2 football seasons. I want to get your overall thoughts on NIL, maybe the pros and cons, things that you've seen that have changed the landscape in your opinion, since you've been kind of doing this obviously for several years and have been embedded in this Alabama football program.
It's been interesting for 2 years. I think it's been shrouded in mystery. I think we're still trying to figure out the overall impact of what this whole thing means. I think it's overdue in a sense that, it's been probably criminal if you take this to court to not allow athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness. There's no other realm where someone doesn't own the rights to their own name, image, and likeness. So, and because it's been so overdue, I think the dam broke. There was going to be some kind of Wild West element to this. There was going to be a lot of unknowns to how it was actually going to all work in reality, because there's a marketplace that just never existed and suddenly was flooded. So it's been all over the place. I think it's positive that someone can profit off their name, image, and likeness, and there's been negative in some of the way it's been used in recruiting, and it's changed that whole landscape. But I think a lot of it is we're still trying to get a full data set, full examination of how it's all actually worked in the real world. And it's hard to, because it's mostly done behind closed doors.
How do you feel it's been handled at Alabama thus far?
It's a great question that we're still trying to figure out. We've tried to figure out exactly, we were trying to track some of these deals, see who was doing what. We tried doing open record requests for records as to interactions for, how many of these players were getting deals, because they had to go through the school to register that. We've been denied on every kind of record request to see kind of numbers for how many people are participating. I think the question is, how much are these deals worth, and how many people are getting paid? What's the real impact? And I think we're still trying to figure out. Clearly, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, the top 1% of these players are doing very well. How much is it helping the rest of the locker room? It's a good question. And how much, is the resentment? That's the thing people always want to talk about. Does the offensive line resent the quarterback who's making 7 figures? And I think that's the kind of thing that's going to come out in time once we can talk to some of these players, once they kind of cycle through, filter out, get outside of the bubble where they can maybe speak more freely as to the full impacts of it. But, there hasn't been any rebellion that visibly within the program over any of these guys getting paid.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what's your thoughts on some of the public conversations that, a lot of people have heard with Coach Saban, with Jimbo Fisher, and then also Deion Sanders in his NIL space. I think that's been an interesting topic that a lot of people just want to hear what other people think about it that's closer to the program.
For sure, yeah. No, it was a crazy few days in May of 2022, quiet time of the summer, and all of a sudden it was 0 to 100 miles an hour real quick that day, that night in Birmingham. I was there with Saban and stuff. I think Saban's he's always kind of been one of the, thought leaders, but he's always been pushing for whatever he wants legislatively, publicly. And I don't know if he knew that we were there at that portion of that public speaking engagement. There's some debate over whether or not he knew that this was going to get out to the public the way it did. He was clearly frustrated with what he perceived to be Texas A&M purchasing a class. They suddenly had the greatest recruiting class in the history of college football, after having good recruiting classes, but not anywhere in that neighborhood. But there's so many gray areas within the rules as to what can be offered and who can be offering. And when they open the floodgates and there aren't as many true guardrails as to what the rules are, they're going to find, people will find the gray areas. They'll find the cracks and exploit it. And it's not even clear what's right and what's wrong. Everything that used to be illegal is now questionably legal. And so I think for that first year, I think people were going to try everything they can to find how far they could go without getting in trouble. A lot of the coaches, they want the name, image, and likeness to be part of the players once they get there. But if it's being used as an enticement to bring players in, get into a bidding war, and of course these things happen behind the scenes before NIL. It's not necessarily new. It's more in the open in that sense that there've been bidding wars from boosters over recruits forever. I think the numbers are just getting bigger and it's more public.
My biggest question, and of course, I've been around the Alabama program for quite some time as well, actually since 2011, so a little over the decade mark as well. But you've really been embedded in it as a beat reporter and seen sort of the evolution of Nick Saban, and I know you've reported on it, obviously, how he's approached the game, how he's had to evolve with the game. Obviously, his opinion of things has changed. 1 minute he says, a playoff's a terrible idea. Now that the playoffs here, okay, now we need expansion because nobody gives a rip about the bowl games anymore, right? So he is having to evolve, and we've seen that in his comments and sort of his stance on things. And you mentioned before when Nick Saban has a statement, wants to get something out, he's going to get it out there in the wide open. I guess, we've heard the term rat poison, which, by the way, was that your question that invoked the rat poison comment at that game?
That will forever be my obituary, the person called rat poison.
So you got the rat poison out of Nick Saban. So that's just forever been out there, and he talks about it often. So would you say, even just kind of looking at this year with the way things have been with NIL, and we'll add transfer portal to that, because obviously Alabama saw a plethora of guys jump in the portal, more than we've ever seen in the history of Alabama. Do you think that there's some frustration, or do you sense that Nick Saban is in a different world, or maybe having to deal with things that maybe some sense of loss of control that maybe he felt he had before that now he doesn't have as much control over?
Maybe in a sense. I think the transfer portal and NIL are kind of separate issues. And it's not even like the portal itself. It's more of the loosening of some of the transfer rules that have allowed players to transfer without sitting out a year. And he's always talked about it being free agency. And the counter to that, I've always said, is that there's free agency every year with coaches who, everyone talks about loyalty, players not having loyalty. Coaches will recruit a player one day and sign a contract and go to another school the next. So it goes both ways. And I don't really hear so many people complaining on social media about coaches taking new jobs and bettering their opportunities. And if a player, they're not all the same situations. And there are times, Saban has said it, I think he said it a year ago, that the good players aren't the ones transferring from Alabama. And for a while that was the case, but there have been a few situations. Jalen Hurts clearly wasn't a bad player who left Alabama. Drew Sanders is an All-American at Arkansas this year after transferring from Alabama last year, leaving for the draft. It's going to be a first-round draft pick. So they've also until this year, done pretty well bringing the right transfers in. Jamison Williams clearly was a big hit in the transfer portal a year ago, 2 years ago now, I guess. So there's clearly more outgoing than incoming, and they can be more choosy with the incoming guys. So in that sense, he kind of has some control. But there are those guys that are going to surprise them and that are going to be the ones that they wish didn't leave. So, yeah, I mean, there are more factors involved, and it might be more in the public eye than it used to be in the past, because there are always guys who are going to be disgruntled and want to leave. But the loosening of the rules made it easier for anyone to leave.
I think that for every college right now, whether, Coach Saban or any other school, it's just a new era, right? So everybody has to kind of like fall in line and figure this stuff out. But I do think that, most players, some of the strategies that coaches have had or athletic departments or teams have had in the past where, it becomes a collection of players where you're recruiting players also against another school so that another school doesn't have them. Sometimes you don't even have intention of playing these players over your Alabama in-state kids and stuff like that. So that's going to backfire. I'm not even saying that for Alabama in general. I'm just saying like for college sports in general. You're going to have to recruit kids because that's who you want. That's who you're going to play. You're going to have to be honest with them, or a lot of it's going to start to backfire as these teams are seeing today that guys and gals are leaving because they've been sold a dream. They're not playing. They're ready to play, and they can play. So I just think that it's a new era of college sports.
At Alabama specifically, when you sign number one class every year, 5 stars, high 4 stars, your collection of all those guys, and there are only 11 starting spots. There are going to be people who can definitely play and start elsewhere, who can find a better opportunity. I know we've tracked that in the past, who's transferred and what they've done. And there have been a few that have done well when they transferred. Most, whether they were going to play at Alabama or not, they didn't necessarily pan out as well after the transfer portal. It's one of those things where you can't doubt, you can't blame somebody. You can't blame an athlete who sees an opportunity. You got one shot in college.
Yeah, it's not all bad either. I think that, I know at Virginia Tech, there was a handful of guys, probably, 8 guys who got to go and get better opportunities for their skill sets. And sometimes it took them dropping down from a D1 to a different level of football just to go and be able to actually make an impact for themselves at another team. So it's not all bad. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but
for sure.
Well, and I think the last thing I'll leave you with, Michael, as we kind of wrap this conversation up, I mentioned that Nick Saban has obviously had to learn to evolve with the game, with the pace of the sport, with things always changing. Do you think that with the landscape of college football and what it's turned into and maybe the direction things are heading, do you think that this is just kind of part of Nick Saban getting used to this just being another wrinkle in the process? Or do you think some of the joy of the sport and coaching at this level, because obviously he's experienced, coaching at the NFL as well. Do you think some of the joy has been taken out of it? Or do you think this is just all part of, once again, another wrinkle, another layer in a couple years? We'll have moved past this and he'll be focused on something else that he's working on trying to overcome.
That's the question everyone around here is asking. That's the question I'm asking. I'm curious. I know he said last preseason SEC Media Days that he's enjoying this, that he enjoys the challenge. And, I guess I was maybe not taking that as seriously. I think this is frustrating for him. I think a lot of this stuff is frustrating and a challenge. And at 71 years old, he's evolved a couple times and has done well in those evolutions. And you wonder how many of those revolutions does he feel like doing with. I'm not saying I have any information that says that he doesn't like it, but I think, it's a lot happening at the same time that takes away some of, we've talked about some of the control that they have on these players. So we'll see. It's the kind of thing where we're monitoring that. We're monitoring a number of different ways of sources to really get into what he's thinking, how he feels about it. And I think he's still learning with how it's going to work at the same time as well. It's been less than 2 years since the NIL floodgates opened up, and I think they're all still trying to figure it out.
And I love that you say we'll see with a big sigh, because I think that's how a lot of people are feeling about this.
Yeah, it's work. It's work for all of us. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's more work for us. But I think it's been long overdue. It's for the NIL to be part of the way this works. This is $1 billion industry, and the players deserve to get a piece of that.
All right, a big thank you again to Michael Casagrande of AL.com for joining us this week. You can follow him at @ByCasagrande on Twitter. You can also follow us on NIL Now Show on Instagram and Twitter, and also the Reddit team and family on Reddit NIL. So tell a friend about this. Let us know what you think about the podcast. Jump in, make comments. Let us know your thoughts. Send us your inquiries. Hey, if you want to come on the show and be a guest, you've got some insight, we'd love to have you. So reach out, let us know, and you can find next week's episode out wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you again to Bobak and the Reddit College Football team for their help. You can follow them at Reddit College Football on Twitter, also online at Reddit College Football. I'm Lauren Sisler. My co-host is Kevin Jones. A big thanks to our audio engineer, Colin Schmeling, and our associate producer, Dean, and our executive producers, Richard Diamond, Selena Roberts, and Scott Broder. Until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to NIL Now, presented by Headline Studio and Reddit.